Hello, my name is Margaret Almond. I'm 76 years old, and for the early part of my life, I lived 2 doors away from Ron, and I'm his niece.
I'm Rosemary Earley, and I am 75, and Ron was my father's youngest brother, and I lived in Church Lane, North Bradley.
Hello, my name is Peter Hunt. I'm 59. Ron technically wasn't related to me, but he was always called Uncle Ron, and just a dear friend of the Hardings and the Hunt family together. The best film I like is the one of the Bradley Hussars on Fete Day. I think that's very funny, with Mr. Harding, Percy Harding, chasing everybody out of the field. I just think it was typical Bradley, and there's a sense of humour to it. A sense of humour which sums up Ron.
I think the film I remember most is the family film that Ron took of me on my scooter coming round the house and being told to start now, off you go. And my mother was there, and my father, and my uncle that lived with us, and that just brings it all back to me. It's just great to see them. Thank you, Ron.
Of Ron's films, I particularly like the sporting one, the cricket one, because there are so many men on it who I recognise as cricketers, and obviously they're no longer around, but whose relatives still live in the village. Ron was born in North Bradley in 1917, and he lived all his life in the village, apart from during the war when he was in the Air Force. He was full of life, very jovial. I don't think I ever saw him really serious or bothered about anything. He just lived life to the full.
Ron was a very caring person. Harold, my father, was his elder brother, and he was an invalid for a long time. So Ron would come and take us out in his car, and he would take my father to various appointments, medical appointments that he had. And he was always cheerful. He lifted us. He was a great character.
I had many days out with him. First time I went in an aeroplane was with Ron and my brother from Surin Abbas. That would have been about 1980-ish. On one occasion I can remember there was a family which is an old family of the village. They went on a coach holiday to Scotland, and lo and behold, when they got there to the hotel, Ron was sat in the lounge waiting for them that they didn't know anything about. I went to Plymouth on a train day out, and I thought, I can hear a voice. I know that voice. And sure enough, he'd overheard me Sunday morning saying we were going to Plymouth on the train, so he thought he'd tag along as well. Ron was very much of a practical joker in a very nice way, but he also had a very serious side, with his love of the church and music and fundraising and things like that.
Ron started to make films after the war, but I was very young when he started making films. But he had an inquiring mind. It was new, and I think that's possibly why he wanted to do it. Well, he was very friendly with Charlie Marshman, Michael Marshman's father, and I think between them, they encouraged each other to take films. I think Charlie just did stills. I'm not sure that he did cine films, but I think that may be one of the reasons why they did it together and Ron took it up.
Ron used to bring films to life, really, in the Progressive Hall in North Bradley. They were, a real novelty with Ron there and his cine camera. He would provide films of Charlie Chaplin and Mickey Mouse, and we all loved it.
In the latter years, my late brother and Ron used to put on many slideshows, because they used to travel the length and breadth of the country together. In the village hall, they would do slideshows of where they'd been and what they were doing. Lots of Ron's antics, because my brother would have been taking the pictures of Ron. Just the time they spent together, really.
One of his fundraising activities, he cycled from John O'Groats to Land's End on 2 occasions. The second occasion, he was in his late 70s, and he did it to raise funds for the Royal United Hospital in Bath and the church here because he'd had a pacemaker fitted. So he actually cycled with the pacemaker. The first time he went was purely to raise funds for the village church because he loved his church. He was a ringer and he was in the choir. He was a chorister. He did about 65, 70 years in the choir.
Ron loved North Bradley. You could see him walking around the village quite nearly every day. He certainly walked from his house in Woodmarsh to church on a Sunday morning, choir practice on a Thursday evening. Ron was larger in life in the village. He could be called Mr. North Bradley, really.
Yes, I remember he had a commemorative service in the church. He had been in the choir for 70 years.
Yeah, there is a plaque in the church commemorating him. Above the seat he used to sit in at choir practice, we had a plaque put in.
I think it was Easter time and he gave everyone an Easter egg as they went into the church. So I remember that.
The plaque that's on the wall in the church, I actually screwed it to the wall. And I can remember having tears running down my face when I was doing it. But then I looked at it and thought, yes, that's all right for Ron.
Oh, and he certainly loved the place. As Peter said, you could see him out in all winds and weathers walking around the village or cycling around the village. And he used to call on people unexpectedly very often. But I think he was always welcome. And I think everybody knew him, perhaps not latterly, because there were so many newcomers to the village. But people who'd lived in the village most of their lives really knew him and respected him and loved him.
I think Ron wanted to capture North Bradley with the lovely films he made, just so to keep our heritage going, because we are proud of where we live. Ron used to try and capture everyday life in the village, especially the village fetes, or if there was special service at Christmas, Easter, anything that Ron thought was a little bit different, he'd be there with his cameras.
And because Ron also had a darkroom in his house and he developed his own black and white photographs.
I think I remember that he went to the top of the church tower and took photographs of the surrounding countryside, and he would do that fairly regularly, I think, to show how things were changing.
And he wanted to take note of events that were happening in the village because we don't have those events any longer. And perhaps he looked into the future and thought, I'll do this because it's not going to happen again. I think there was a certain inquisitiveness about him, and he wanted, I can't say he was nosy, but he wanted to know about other people, and he was interested in other people.
I saw him once on Westbury Station, quite unexpectedly really, and he had his haversack on his back and he was out for the day, and he often did that. He would just jump on a train and go wherever the fancy took him, and then he'd come back and have one of meal of fish and chips or something. Yes. And he would have enjoyed his day. Yes, he did that often.
I think when Ron showed his films, although I wasn't there, I can imagine that it was a massive moment for the people in them, because they'd probably never seen themselves on a screen. And it would be novel as well. I think they really enjoyed it.
I think it was very unusual for people to see themselves on film in those days, not like it is now when it's such a regular occurrence. Photographs and film and videos are readily available, so it was a complete novelty in Ron's times.
I think people were often shocked to see themselves, but I imagine that nobody at that time thought that we'd be looking at them 60 or 70 years in the future. I imagine half the people, well, some of them aren't around any longer, but half the people who are wouldn't have expected to be seeing themselves now on camera, on film. When I first saw myself on film, it was a bit of a revelation, and I couldn't really believe it was me at first. It was a bit shocking, I suppose, to actually think that Ron would want to take a picture of me and keep it for posterity. I think one of Ron's chief interest in filming was actually filming village life as it was. The clergy, the bell ringers, an old chap who lived down the rank called Sammy Paradise. He was a bit like Steptoe. He had a a horse and cart, and he went round the village and into town with his dogs running beside the horse, picking up all sorts of things.
A rag and bone
A
man.
rag and bone man, yes. Yeah, and Ron picked... I don't think Ron had him on film, but he actually took photos of him.
Ron's photographic career was probably his second career. He loved his printing. I mean, not many people have a printing press in the back of their house. But secondly, and not far behind, would be his photography work. North Bradley has changed drastically in the last 70 years, although I've only been there for 60. When you see these films, you can see exactly how Church Lane was, literally a lane. Suffolk Road is not like it is today. It was more of an upmarket track, let's put it like that. And now we have thunder and lorries coming through on a daily basis. Totally different.
There are so many more houses here now, and it's lost that country village atmosphere that it used to have, as we remember as children. So I think nostalgia creeps in, and you remember days of sunshine and less people and more caring going on. So yes, it's changed in that way.
When I look back to when I was a child, I almost feel I'd like to go back there again, because life was so much calmer. There weren't all the worries and the hassles that there are nowadays. Mind you, as Rosemary said, you only remember the good times. You don't remember, at least I find, you don't remember the bad times. But I do sometimes feel very nostalgic about the village when I was a child. I think I would prefer the village as it was 70 years ago, but then we've got to make progress. We've got to have housing for people, and in many ways I think it's a pity that all these houses have grown up, but that's life, really.
I've lived in the village all my life. My children were born in the village and they're grown up now, and they love to see this sort of thing. And you can still pick out houses, obviously, that are in Church Lane or Southwick Road. And I just think it's important for them to know what the village was like all those years ago. Ron's legacy is the life that he led in this village and the way he loved the church.
I think Ron is a complete one-off, and we're very grateful for the legacy that he did leave us.
And I would reiterate that, and I think Ron's legacy is great in the village, but also I can't emphasise how much he did love the church and how much time he spent there ringing, singing, attending nearly every service there was.
Ron Harding was so special to me, it's untrue. I can see him with his cassock and surplice on, singing in the choir. I can see him in the belfry, ringing the bells. I can see him playing cricket with my dad and Uncle Rory. He just was Ron. That's who he was. You could always see Ron walking around the village, and wherever he went, he had a camera around his neck, ready to take the action.
I'll always remember my Uncle Ron. He was a prominent figure in my childhood. He was really loved by all of our family and by members of the village too, so he was very special.
Yes, he was. Ron was very special. He was a special uncle. He was actually godfather to my eldest son. His memory still lives on in the village today, because there are so many people who still remember him and his legacy.